Welcome in, everybody. All eyes on the White House press briefing room and the podium, where reporters will send quite a few questions to the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt. So a little bit of news deconstructed for you. Headline after headline in recent days, not the least of which, what to make of President Donald Trump's mention of the U.S. potentially taking over the Gaza Strip and moving the people out of Gaza. So we've got a couple of cameras here on various views. This is sort of a little look behind the scenes of what we're talking about here. First camera, of course, on the podium. And then, of course, the camera on the question. The people who will be asking the questions, we've got cameras on them as well. Questions reveal us. And so we want to see the people asking the questions as much as we want to see Ms. Leavitt, who is answering the questions. So we are there. We're going to be there as soon as she takes to the podium right now. But as we can show you, reporters are just getting ready. So just think about this. We're just 3 weeks into the Trump presidency. And as always, there's a lot to keep track of. A storm of executive actions, executive orders, and of course, the lawsuits that followed. Strong reaction also pouring in from across the world. In fact, this comment, though, sure to dominate the questions in today's briefing. Listen what the president said.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site. I envision a world, people living there, the world's people. I think you'll make that into an international, unbelievable place. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
You heard the reaction there in the room. So meantime, we are keeping a close eye on the podium right now. We'll bring you the very latest from the White House press briefing room as soon as that begins. Of course, we're anticipating a lot of questions on how this would work. So on Capitol Hill, reaction to President Trump's proposal to take over Gaza, taking over the headlines. Democrats slamming the move as, quote, horrific. Republicans call the proposal a good development. Here's Senator John Fetterman taking a different approach than some of his Democratic colleagues. Listen.
Just trying to shake things up and just announce, like, there is some truths about Gaza. How are somebody able to leave there right now when probably 85 to 90% or more of the buildings are destroyed or seriously damaged? So where are people going to live and how things are going to go? And how can you rebuild Gaza until Hamas is still allowed to endure? So there's a lot of questions, and where's the money going to come from? So this is about, I think for me, I didn't take it as like a serious situation, and it's just about shaking things up, but I'm not going to freak out on it.
So let's go live to CBS News congressional correspondent Caitlin Huey-Burns on the Hill. All right, he's not freaking out about it, but I have to ask you because Mike Johnson seems at least open to what the president said about Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, today he called it a bold move, and he seemed to be deferential to the president on this and kind of waiting to see, in his words, what happens specifically here. But by and large, you're not seeing Republicans really willing to criticize the president on anything, especially not on this. Now, what's important to note here is that, this is a president who ran for years on a non-interventionist kind of foreign policy. This, you would imagine, would be antithetical to that approach. You also have at the same time the president's directive to essentially unwind USAID foreign aid. So how does that square with a potential proposal to require more intervention in the Middle East and not ruling out the use of U.S. military troops on the ground there? So we are monitoring Republican reaction on this specifically because this is would represent kind of a fissure within the party on this. But by and large, you're seeing a Republican Party pretty deferential to the president, wanting to give him time and space here. But again, how does that challenge their long-held beliefs?
Well, speaking of a Republican Party wanting to give deference and time and space, let's talk about the president's picks for confirmation. Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., they cleared the hurdles yesterday out of committee. So now what happens there?
Yeah, big procedural hurdles. That yesterday was really the question about the fates of these two controversial nominees, and the idea that they got through committee gets them obviously a step closer to full confirmation by the Senate, but remove some of those wild cards or questions about whether they could actually get there, and their teams feeling much more confident in their confirmations.
Okay, so Never at a loss for headlines these days. We want to get to this. Congressional Congressman Al Green gave a passionate speech on the House floor calling for the impeachment of President Trump. We want to let our viewers hear what was said there and then ask you about it. So listen.
I rise to announce that the movement to impeach the president has begun. I rise to announce that I will bring articles of impeachment against the president for dastardly deeds proposed and dastardly deeds done. All
right, so of course he is reacting to the news of what came out of that news conference with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu regarding the U.S. potentially taking over the Gaza Strip. What kind of legs can this have?
Well, you have to consider who it's coming from. Al Green has proposed impeaching President Trump several times, especially in his first administration. So this is nothing new. I don't think this has many legs here on Capitol Hill because of who it's coming from. The bigger question is, how do Democrats counter the president and his proposals and his use of executive authority, especially? I mean, Democrats up here are in the minority. They have limited tools to go after some of these things that they're seeing coming from the White House, but they have very little leverage to do it. On the Senate side, there is an effort to stall the confirmation processes for his nominees, for example. But there is this broader question about what Democrats can actually do countering this administration. A lot of it will be through messaging. Just outside here, there is a big protest of USAID workers trying to send a message that way. There are going to be lots of legal fights as well. I wouldn't put too much stock in this declaration for impeachment because it's kind of been done a lot from this particular congressman. But that's something that we're looking for, is how exactly Democrats counter, whether through messaging or policy, what's coming from this administration, especially when you have that united Republican force around the president, essentially ceding some of their power to him, at least at the moment.
The pen of history has to write fast. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you so much for that update. So we're also following breaking news. President Trump's push to end birthright citizenship has now been blocked, keep in mind, for a second time. A federal judge in Maryland ordered a nationwide pause on Trump's executive order. In its scathing rebuke, Judge Deborah Boardman said no court in the country has endorsed the Trump administration's interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and goes on to say this court will not be the first. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi was just sworn in. She takes over the DOJ a day after multiple federal lawsuits were filed by FBI agents and employees who investigated January 6th. Now, those staff members are trying to stop the public release of their names. So let's bring in CBS News Justice Department correspondent Scott McFarland. Scott, welcome in. Forgive me, we're getting a cue. Okay, Scott, you're on the phone. Hello, my friend. I was about to turn to a monitor here, but we'll hear from you. So talk to me about Pam Bondi's swearing in and what her first actions could be.
Happy to do so, and I always look better when you can't see me. We have Pam Bondi just walking into the Department of Justice, the next Attorney General, the new Attorney General, and there's going to be a sea change here. This is somebody who could not be a more striking contrast from Merrick Garland. She's somebody who has defended Trump in his first impeachment trial. She's somebody who has denied the results of the 2020 election, and somebody who has pledged to come in here and end what she calls the weaponization of the department. But she's coming in here, Reed, amid some turmoil. I mean, the FBI right now is going through some rough times. You have 5,000 or so agents and employees who've been named, and their names have been handed over to the Department of Justice leadership as being involved with the January 6th investigations. They're concerned about mass firings and resignations because of it. And it's not clear what happens next with that list or with this department.
Any sort of insurance for these FBI agents who are just following orders, Scott?
So far, a few things have been done to firewall this. First of all, the FBI's interim leadership has handed over the full identities of these agents and employees, but not their names on the list. It has their employee ID numbers, which presumably, Reed, makes that list more difficult to leak or release and to, as the FBI is concerned, put the agents and employees in danger. But it's not clear if there's going to be employment actions against any number of them. With the acting deputy attorney general has said he wants this list. for consideration of possible employment actions against FBI workers. And how many and how far they'll go is far from clear to the agents. That's why two different groups of FBI employees have filed suit against the Department of Justice, against their own employers, saying their privacy has been invaded, that their due process rights have been violated, and that the court should order that list not be released.
So any timeline here, Scott, for when some of this could play out, when we could get some definites?
Yep, we expect a court hearing tomorrow morning, 10:30 a.m. in Washington, D.C. time, where the attorneys for those FBI agents will face a judge and ask for some type of court action against the listing and the potential release of the list of agents. Pam Bondi is expected to speak publicly at some point in the next day or two, potentially hear from the Department of Justice headquarters, either to the media or to the employees here in the building. Whether she addresses this issue is far from clear.
How is this being seen by lawmakers, Scott, on Capitol Hill? You know, we see these issues often split down party lines, but some lawmakers potentially could see this as Donald Trump following up on a grudge. Others could say, as Donald Trump has said, that he wants to see the FBI clean and above board, according to their view. How is it being seen by lawmakers that you're talking to?
Two different issues. First of all, there are Democrats who think this is an extension of those mass blanket pardons of January 6th defendants, right, that this naming of names of FBI agents who are part of it is part of the whitewashing of history, this villainization of the police who were investigating a violent, horrific crime, and potentially could set some of those agents up for retaliation by Trump supporters or even the sympathizers of the rioters themselves. The second issue is process, Reed. This purge, this potential purge of the FBI began its motions before Pam Bondi was confirmed as Attorney General, before Kash Patel has gotten a vote to be the next FBI director. Members of Congress want to know what they knew about this before they took office.
Wow. Ripples and waves. Scott McFarlane, always great to talk to you. Next time, I want to see you on a monitor, my friend.
Right back at you.
Take care, friend. Game of telephone today. Well, less than 24 hours after a U.S. ban on accepting packages from China and Hong Kong, the U.S. Postal Service says they'll now resume normal operations. You keeping track of this? This is all about the tariffs and the trade fight between the U.S. and China. Now, other than the reversal, no explanation from the USPS other than to say that they're working with Customs and Border Protection to avoid disruptions. Online retailers Shine and Temu, their popularity is booming. We know this. And perhaps another trade war punch, President Trump is considering adding the retailers to the Department of Homeland Security's forced labor list. It's a list that singles out companies that rely on that forced labor to manufacture its goods. The Trump administration has not made a final decision on this matter, but we'll be watching it closely. Well, you can now add the CIA to President Donald Trump's buyout list. Workers of the Central Intelligence Agency can now join the so-called deferred resignation program. So here's the deal from the federal government. Quit your job, and they say that they will give you 8 months' pay and benefits. Civil service employees received the offer last week, but national security workers were not originally included in that deal. So now that has changed. However, there are some stipulations on this one. Not all CIA workers are eligible to get that offer. So here's an overview of what the CIA does. Their job is essentially to stop threats before they happen. According to the agency, here's how they do that, using foreign intelligence, analysis, and covert action as directed by the president. We'll continue watching that. Plus, we're watching those podiums at the White House press briefing room. So many questions directed at the press secretary, Ms. Leavitt, regarding what is going to happen in Gaza. One day after President Donald Trump stood shoulder to shoulder with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and suggested the U.S. could take over Gaza. Where would the citizens of Gaza go? Many questions when we come back. All right, listening live right now to the White House press room, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt taking questions from reporters. Let's listen in.
Foreign entanglements, nation building, sending American troops to fight abroad, particularly in the Middle East. This plan seems like it could ultimately involve all of those things. Can you explain this reversal and how building and owning Gaza squares with America First foreign policy?
I would reject the premise of your question that this forces the United States to be entangled in conflicts abroad. The president has not committed to putting boots on the ground in Gaza. He has also said that the United States is not going to pay for the rebuilding of Gaza. His administration is going to work with our partners in the region to reconstruct this region. And let me just take a step back here, because this is an out-of-the-box idea. That's who President Trump is. That's why the American people elected him. And his goal is lasting peace in the Middle East for all people in the region. And as I said in my opening remarks, we've had the same people pushing the same solutions to this problem for decades. And it's been made very clear to the president that the United States needs to be involved in this rebuilding effort to ensure stability in the region for all people. But that does not mean boots on the ground in Gaza. It does not mean American taxpayers will be funding this effort. It means Donald Trump, who is the best deal maker on the planet, is going to strike a deal with our partners in the region.
He did not rule out American troops in Gaza last night. Are you doing that now?
I am saying that the president has not committed to that just yet. He has not made that commitment, and you know that.
And on the foreign partners, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Saudis have already panned this plan. What foreign partners, if any, have expressed any interest in being part of it?
Well, the president has said he's been socialing this idea for quite some time. He's been thinking about this. He said in his remarks last night this was not a decision or an announcement that he takes lightly. And the president has already spoken to the President al-Sisi. In fact, that was his first foreign leader call. He's meeting with the King of Jordan, King Abdullah, next week. He spoke with the King of Bahrain. He spoke with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And he has made it very clear, he's been very vocal, that he expects our partners in the region, particularly Egypt and Jordan, to accept Palestinian refugees temporarily so that we can rebuild their home. I'd like to show you some images of Gaza that were taken. Fox News aired this. I mean, that is, as they put it, an apocalyptic scene in Gaza. This is an uninhabitable place for human beings. Do you really think that families can live their dream in a region that looks like this, with no running water, no electricity? And the special envoy to the president, Steve Witkoff, recently traveled to Gaza, as you all know. And he came back with images that he showed the president of the dire situation here. And the president made this decision with a humanitarian heart for all people in the region. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. Are any officials here preparing to fight Democratic lawmakers in the streets?
Absolutely not.
So,
thanks for the question.
Some elected Democrats are so steamed about DOJ. Congresswoman LaMonica McIver says we are at war. Ilhan Omar says we might actually see somebody get killed. And Chris Van Hollen says we have to fight this in the Congress. We have to fight this in the streets. So what now?
And may I just point out, if you heard that type of violent, enticing rhetoric from our side of the aisle, from Republican leaders on Capitol Hill, I think there would be a lot more outrage in this room today. It's unacceptable, the comments that have been made by these Democrat leaders, and frankly, they don't even know what they're talking about. Because President Trump was elected with a mandate from the American people to make this government more efficient. He campaigned across this country with Elon Musk, vowing that Elon was going to head up the Department of Government Efficiency, and the two of them, with a great team around them, were going to look at the receipts of this federal government and ensure it's accountable to American taxpayers. That's all that is happening here. And for Democrat officials to incite violence and encourage Americans to take to the streets is incredibly alarming, and they should be held accountable for that rhetoric.
It sounds like something that they're most concerned about is DOJ engineers with access to Treasury systems. Can you clarify, do the DOJ engineers have read-only access in these systems, so they are not allowed to write new code? No. They are not, okay. No. And then one more thing. NBC is reporting that some of the illegal immigrants that we've seen rounded up and arrested are not being deported. They're being released with ankle or wrist monitoring devices, or they have to check in on the phone. So is the administration arresting more people than you have room for?
I have seen the reports, and I'm glad you brought it up because we want to address it. There have been a total of 461 illegal aliens. This is of this morning when I got this information from DHS. that have been released from custody of the more than 8,000 that have been arrested since President Trump was inaugurated. It's less than 6%. And there are reasons for their release. Some of the factors include a lack of significant likelihood of removal in the foreseeable future, lack of detention availability, which is something this president and this administration has been incredibly vocal about. We are doing everything we can to deport and detain illegal immigrants, but we need Congress's help to increase funding for Border Patrol and for ICE to increase detention capability in our facilities. And then other serious medical conditions have also been the reasons for some of the release of these individuals. But none of them have final deportation orders. Many of them are probably contesting their immigration status. I'd refer you to DHS for more details, but I did get that information because I knew it would be a question. So thank you. Sure. Yes.
The president and you here again today have made clear, given the devastation, you think Palestinians have no choice but to leave Gaza and go elsewhere. But Palestinians say this is their home. They don't want to go. The president last night said he's willing to use the military if necessary. Is the U.S. prepared to remove Palestinians from Gaza by force?
The president is prepared to rebuild Gaza for Palestinians and all people in the region, peace-loving people who want real economic development and opportunity in the region. This is a region that has been controlled by Iranian-backed terrorists, Hamas, who have brutalized not just Israelis but Palestinians too. It is because of Hamas that you see those images on that screen, that Gaza has become a demolition site because Hamas launched that brutal attack on Israel on October the 7th. And so again, I would stress, President Trump wants to ensure that this can be a place where all people can live in peace. He is a peacemaker in chief. He made that very clear in his first term. And as for how that will be accomplished, the president and his team are talking with our allies in the region to consider next steps.
But should the American people be prepared to see U.S. military on the ground fighting a ground war against Hamas?
Again, the president has not committed to U.S. troops in the region.
But it is an option.
I have said that the president has not committed to that yet. Sure.
If I could just follow up on that, though, why not rule out the idea of committing U.S. troops? This has been a long-standing argument that the president has made really over the last decade or so, talking about endless wars and not something the U.S. wants. Why not rule out troops?
Because I think the president is very good when he's making deals and negotiating not to rule out anything because he wants to preserve that leverage in negotiations. And so I think that's what he's doing here. Mary.
Follow up on that, though. He also said that everyone loves this plan. He said that in the Oval Office this morning. In fact, the Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan called it a declaration of war on the Arab people. So how does he square the fact that even some Republicans on the Hill are objecting to this or questioning this? How does he square the fact saying everyone loves this plan?
Well, King Abdullah of Jordan will be here next week, so I can provide you more context on the conversations he will have directly with the President of the United States after that meeting. And I would just point out that there's been a lot of leaders and officials all around the world who have doubted, I suppose, the deal-making ability of President Trump. You heard the Panama leader saying that he would not agree to some of the concessions that he has now made because of Secretary Rubio's visit. You had the Colombian president saying he wouldn't accept flights of Colombian illegal nationals who have entered into our country illegally. And those flights are underway, so actions speak louder than words. Dasha.
Caroline, you said the president has been working on this idea for a while behind the scenes now. Is there a written plan based on the president's proposal for Gaza? And if so, when was it drafted and who had a hand in that?
The plan was written in the president's remarks last night as he revealed it to the world and to the American people, and his team are continuing to be engaged on this effort. I saw the National Security Advisor this morning. He has a very busy day of calls, and they will, again, continue to engage with our partners. That includes Steve Witkoff as well. Mary.
Two questions for you on the news of the day. So how is today's executive order going to impact the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles? For example, would a man who thinks that he's a transgender woman be allowed to compete as a female on U.S. soil?
It's a very good question, and the president has actually mentioned this, that he does expect the Olympic Committee and the NCAA to no longer allow men to compete in women's sports. And I think the president, with the signing of his pen, starts a very public pressure campaign on these organizations to do the right thing for women and for girls across the country. Again, this is an incredibly popular position. There have been many notable female athletes who have had the courage to speak out against some very powerful institutions in this country. They deserve to have a voice and a say. The president is bringing their voice to the highest level at the White House this afternoon, and he expects these organizations to comply with this federal executive order that he'll be signing today.
Thank you. And one more on media coverage of this executive order and the topic in general. What's the White House's view of framing that calls men transgender females or similar rhetoric coming from organizations like the ACLU and GLAAD?
Well, it's been very clear. The policy of this administration is that there are only two sexes, male and female. Pretty simple. Brian Glenn.
Yes. USAID has gotten a lot of attention in the last couple of days with some of these bizarre things that we've been, taxpayers have been funding. Now it looks like there are a couple media outlets that have been dragged into this conversation as far as USAID funding as well. Does the President have any comment on that?
So upon coming out here to the briefing room, I was made aware of the funding from USAID to media outlets, including Politico, who I know has a seat in this room. And I can confirm that the more than $8 million taxpayer dollars that have gone to essentially subsidizing subscriptions to Politico on the American taxpayers' dime will no longer be happening. The DOJ team is working on canceling those payments now. Again, this is a whole-of-government effort to ensure that we are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books. And this president and his team are making decisions across the board on, do these receipts serve the interests of the American people? Is this a good use of the American taxpayers' money? If it is not, that funding will no longer be sent abroad, and American taxpayers will see significant savings because of that effort. Thank you. I'd like to give some love to the back row. I've heard that unfortunately they haven't been called on in years past. So Reagan, why don't you go ahead?
Thanks, Caroline. The WHC announced that comedian Amber Ruffin, who has called the president a toddler with his pants pulled down, will be the entertainment for this year's Correspondents' Dinner. Does the White House have a reaction to this choice, and will the president be attending the dinner this year?
Certainly an interesting choice. I have the president's invitation on my desk. I have the invitation for myself on my desk as well. Haven't talked to the president about it. When he makes his decision, I will let you all know. But definitely an interesting choice of the comedian. I'll talk to the boss about it and see what we decide. Sure, go ahead.
Caroline, in the back,
yes, yes.
On the executive order set to be signed today, you said that this will be enforced. Can you spell out for schools and the public how exactly the administration plans to enforce this, even at the local level? And on top of that, there are human rights groups who say that this could expose kids to discrimination. What is your response to that?
I think kids have already been exposed to discrimination, especially young women and girls who have been forced to shower in locker rooms with biological men, who have been forced to compete on playing fields with biological men, which is incredibly unfair and unsafe, and again, an incredibly unpopular policy with the American people. As for the actions that this executive order takes, I already laid those out at the beginning of the briefing. I'm happy to give you a copy of this fact sheet so you can let your audiences across the country know.
What's your message to schools who don't comply with this?
They should, because it's going to be federal law in about an hour and a half. So your colleague to your right, to my left.
Thanks, Caroline.
Yes.
Taylor at Spectrum News. You talked a bit about DOJ. Elon Musk is currently a, quote, special government employee who also owns companies that have billions of dollars in federal contracts. You said earlier this week that he has abided by all applicable federal laws, but what steps is the Trump administration taking to address that conflict of interest?
The president was already asked and answered this question this week, and he said if Elon Musk comes across a conflict of interest with the contracts and the funding that DOJ is overseeing, then Elon will excuse himself from those contracts. And he has, again, abided by all applicable laws. In the back left, go ahead.
Trade advisor Peter Navarro, when asked about the External Revenue Service today, said, quote, we're going to collect a lot of tariff revenues and we're going to get tax cuts out of it. Is it the official position of the White House that tariffs will lower taxes for Americans?
The president has always been clear that he believes tariffs are a tax on foreign nations, and he's committed to cutting taxes for the American people here at home. He also believes tariffs are a great revenue raiser for this country, and that's exactly why he has committed to the creation of the External Revenue Service, which I think is a phenomenal idea. We'll just go down the whole row. Go ahead.
Tom Bateman with the BBC. Can you confirm that under the President's plans for Gaza, any and all Palestinians who want to stay in Gaza on their land will be allowed to do so?
I can confirm that the president is committed to rebuilding Gaza and to temporarily relocating those who are there because, as I've showed you repeatedly, it is a demolition site. There is no running water. There is no electricity. The president wants these individuals to live in peace. He is committed to doing that with this very bold new plan, and we will continue to keep you apprised of updates as we receive them. Ed Lawrence,
that's not an
go
answer.
ahead. Yes, go ahead, Ed.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So now that the President Trump's policies are starting to take shape, how long will it take to cycle through and get some of the actual prices that Americans are paying to come down?
Prices at the store and at the grocery pump? Across the board, sure. Well, the president is doing everything he can, obviously, to reduce the cost of living crisis in this country as quickly as possible. That's why he signed a litany of executive orders across the board. In the first couple of weeks here, he declared a national energy emergency. He committed to cutting 10 regulations for every new one on the book. As you know, working for a Fox Business-related outlet, deregulation and energy independence are huge drivers of reducing inflation in this country. And I think Americans can be assured by the results President Trump had in his first term, when again inflation was 1.4% when he left office.
Is it months or is it a year? And will Americans have the patience to wait for it?
I don't have a timeline.
All right, listening in to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt taking questions from reporters on a wide range of topics. And not the least of which, of course, is what came out of President Donald Trump's mouth regarding Gaza and the future of Gaza. Let's go live right now to CBS News contributor Robert Berger. He's live from Jerusalem. So we're only weeks into the new presidency. We're also only days into phase one of the ceasefire deal, the hostage release deal. If this plays out the way the president seems to be signaling, could that deal be in jeopardy, Robert?
I think so. It's definitely, this creates a problem for phase two of the ceasefire, which is only beginning to be negotiated this weekend. Right now, we're in phase one, about halfway through. 18 hostages have been released. And there's another hostage release set for Saturday. That's still on. But the second phase, which is the most difficult, which is supposed to see an end to the war and the release of the remaining 50 or 60 hostages, living and dead, that still has to be negotiated. The problem that this creates is that what does Hamas actually have to gain if the end game here is the end of Hamas rule in Gaza and the expulsion or displacement or transfer, if you will, of around 2 million Palestinians? Maybe Hamas will want to hang on to the only card it really has to play, which is the hostages. And then, yes, the ceasefire would be in jeopardy.
What are you hearing from hostage families? Families of hostages that still are not being released, even in phase one.
They're worried. Because, you know, like I said, this phase is going to see the release, if all goes well, of 33 hostages, about 25 of whom are alive. 8 are dead. They still haven't gotten back yet. But you've got another 50 or 60, including younger people like soldiers, who have been left for the second phase of the deal. The families of the hostages are very worried now that if this second phase doesn't go forward, then their loved ones may not get back.
So you are closer to that situation than we are. From where you are sitting right now in Israel, Jordan, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia are said to be working with Donald Trump and his administration on what to do with all of the people who would come out of Gaza. Do you get the sense that there is an active and positive movement with the president and those nations?
Not really. We heard just now in the White House briefing that the president has been in touch with those countries, and he keeps doubling down, saying they will take some refugees. Now, what we heard publicly today from Jordan, Egypt, and not only today, but in the past days, is the Palestinians have to remain on their own land. This is a principle that's really guided Arab policy for decades. Palestinians have to remain on their own land in a future state. But maybe behind the scenes, certainly behind the scenes, the U.S. is trying to broker some kind of a bigger Mideast deal. It's going to be very difficult, though, to overcome that obstacle.
And then we also heard from Caroline Leavitt saying that the president has not committed to putting U.S. boots on the ground, has not committed to the United States and dollars of the United States going into rebuilding Gaza. Are people buying that where you are?
Yeah, I don't think anybody's expecting to see American soldiers here in the Middle East anytime soon, certainly not in Gaza. I mean, that would be something I think, even as she said, something further down the road that would be part of a bigger deal in coordination with the Arab states to rebuild Gaza. But still, this is a big obstacle, the concept of removing 2 million Palestinians out of Gaza. But maybe there could be some kind of compromise. I mean, that's what we was just suggested in the White House briefing. This could be an opening position as the U.S. tries to make a deal.
Well, as Caroline Levitt said, and these are her words, to preserve the leverage. We will see how that plays out. Robert, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thanks.
All right, when we come back, news of executive orders coming from the White House once again, and one with an unusual warning for Iran. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. President Trump signed more executive orders Tuesday, among them a maximum pressure campaign against the Iranian government in order to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapon. So the White House did not specifically state what kind of pressure that would include, but Mr. Trump said he was torn when signing the order, then sent a chilling warning to Iran after reporters asked why he was unhappy to sign it if Iran previously threatened to assassinate him. Listen.
Well, they haven't done that, and that would be a terrible thing for them to do, not because of me. If they did that, they would be obliterated. That would be the end. I've left instructions. If they do it, they get obliterated. There won't be anything left. And they shouldn't be able to do it. And Biden should have said that, but he never did. I don't know why, lack of intelligence, perhaps. But he never said it. If that happens to a leader, or close to a leader, frankly, if you had other people involved also, you would call for total obliteration of a state that did it. That would include Iran.
So let's go to CBS News Pentagon reporter Ellie Watson. The word obliterated is a big word for a president to use. What does he mean?
Yeah, well, Reed, I'll get to what he said last night, but I do want to share something that we just learned, and it's related, and that's that former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper has had his security detail, which was provided by the Defense Department, removed. We've heard that from a U.S. official and a Defense Department official. Esper, like President Trump, has faced threats from Iran because of the 2020 killing of Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force. This removal of security from Esper follows other officials who have had their security revoked, like former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, as for what President Trump said last night about obliteration, he said very loudly and with language what the Biden administration actually said quietly last fall, which is that Iran has been warned that if it tries to attempt an attack on President Trump, it would be considered an act of war. Now, the Pentagon does have plans it could pull from that would significantly harm Iran, including going after its nuclear facilities. As far as instructions, only the commander-in-chief can instruct the military what to do. So any instructions left by a previous commander-in-chief, the military couldn't act on.
All right, so let's go back to what you mentioned regarding Esper. What does this say about the president's relationship or suspicions there?
This is kind of the latest, what appears to be retaliation. I mean, when we got to the Pentagon on Inauguration Day, we saw the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. His portrait was removed from the Pentagon hallways. Several days later, we saw Secretary of Defense Mark Esper's portrait removed from when he was Secretary of the Army. And we also saw Milley's portrait from the Chief of Staff of the Army hallway also removed. President Trump has not shied away from criticizing these officials who have criticized his first administration. And so this pulling of security details seems to be the latest semi-retaliatory move by the Trump administration. Now, President Trump, when asked about the previous officials who have had their security details removed, like Bolton, like Pompeo, Trump said that when you get security, you don't get it forever. And that was part of his calculation when revoking them.
Okay, so what's next? Who replaces? Who comes in line?
So what we're wondering is who in the Defense Department actually gave the order. This security for Mark Esper is provided by the Defense Department because he was a former Secretary of Defense. The security for Pompeo and for Pompeo's former aide, Brian Hook, that was provided by diplomatic security, and so Secretary of State Rubio actually gave that order. So we're fleshing through who actually gave the order to take these detainees away, and what the extent of the threat to these officials who were involved in Qasem Soleimani's killing is today.
So many details to pick through. We'll leave that for you to chase answers. But while we have you here, I want to talk about President Trump's crackdown on undocumented immigrants. The U.S. deported its first migrant group to Guantanamo Bay. Do we know who they are? And can you talk about the infrastructure the Pentagon needs to build to really accommodate the thousands of people expected?
The first flight to Guantanamo Bay under this new plan proposed by President Trump arrived yesterday. That flight had about 10 detainees that the U.S. government considers high-threat detainees, and so these members were told of a Venezuelan gang, and because they're high threat, they're going to go into an already secure detention facility in cells. They'll be separate from the 15 prisoners that are still at Guantanamo Bay from the War on Terror, but these new detainees will still be in cells. That's only 10 migrants. President Trump has said that there should be space for up to 30,000. These already existing detention facilities don't have that space, and so over the weekend, the Pentagon sent 300 Marines who have begun building tents to have additional capacity as these expected migrants start making their way to Guantanamo Bay.
CBS News Pentagon reporter Ellie Watson, thank you so much. So many developments. Seems like by the minute. We appreciate you jumping in to talk to us. So following that White House press briefing room, let's talk to CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, you were in the room. Major headline today, the future of Gaza. Did we get any clarity on what Trump intends to carry out after saying that the U.S. will, quote, take over the Gaza Strip? What are the details here?
We did not get many more details, Reed. Good to be with you. But two things notable that Caroline did there, Caroline Levitt, during the briefing. First of all, made clear, and this is somewhat massaging what he suggested last night, that there is no commitment yet to putting U.S. troops in the region. He seemed to infer that last night pretty much more clearly, but today saying, no, he hasn't decided to do that for certain. There are a few questions on potential military engagement, and she batted them away. The other thing she said, remember, he said that he supports the idea of permanently resettling everyone in Gaza to Egypt, to Jordan, or to other countries. Today, she was saying, or she was suggesting in part, that they might just temporarily relocate the 2 million plus who live in Gaza and allow them to come back later. All of this introduces a suite of follow-up questions about how exactly it would work. Their bottom line here at the White House is, look, definition of insanity, as she put it, is to keep doing what's been done before. They're trying to come up with different options. Ultimately, what the president is doing here, when you consider that he's talking on a regular basis, it seems, with the Egyptians. He held meetings with the Israeli prime minister last night. He has the king of Jordan coming soon. The vice president's headed to Europe to talk to allies there next week, is to try to get some kind of international consensus and program put together to rebuild that part of the Middle East and sort through exactly what needs to be done next. But remember, the agreement that's in place that's been releasing hostages still doesn't have a firm commitment or plan to end the hostilities between the Israelis and Hamas. Like, when would the Israeli Defense Forces pull out, for example, completely and stop that bombardment so that you could get to this step that the president has now seized on, and that is the potential redevelopment of the Strip.
Well, and I thought it was also telling when Caroline Levitt was asked, well, can you rule out, why not rule out that military troops from the United States would not be boots on the ground? She said, quote, he wants to preserve leverage. Is that what this is really all about?
Sure.
As she says, casting him as the deal maker?
Reed, that's what everything this president is doing is all about, leverage. He says certain things to try to extract some kind of concession from the other side. They get something, they see it as a victory, and they move on. They listed off a series of them today. For example, the meeting that the Secretary of State had in Panama where he went warning that the U.S. might try to retake control of the canal if the Chinese influence grows too much. Well, what did the Panamanian president do just hours after meeting with Rubio? Announced that the Panamanians are pulling out of a Chinese infrastructure plan. They see that as a win. What does he do? Threaten tariffs on Mexico and China and Canada. Mexico and Canada have phone calls with him on Monday. By 3 o'clock, it's all over. He claims that they're all going to send thousands of troops to their borders now to try to address the concerns about the flow of illegal drugs and undocumented immigrants. He sees it as a win. What is he doing now here in the Gaza Strip? He's suggesting the U.S. will potentially take it over. What is he hoping happens? He's hoping that Arab and other Middle Eastern countries step up now, along with Europe, and say, well, let's come up with a group plan here, some kind of international consensus on what exactly can be done to save this region and to rebuild it. Does it ultimately lead to having U.S. troops on the ground? Well, he doesn't want to rule that out yet, because for some unforeseen reason, perhaps there needs to be. But by merely talking about it as dramatically and boldly as he did, it gets a conversation going now, and he would hope potentially get allies to start making concessions or plans to help rebuild that region along with the United States. So yes, this is right out of the Trump playbook. It's what he does on a regular basis. Certainly has been demonstrating an ability to do it in foreign affairs. And this White House, at least a few weeks in now, suggests that they've scored some significant wins by doing so. We'll have to see as things play out whether or not they were indeed real concessions and lead to real change. But in the short term, they certainly see that as having happened.
Ed O'Keefe reporting live, fresh from that White House press briefing. Always good to talk to you. Thank you so much. When we come back on CBS News 24/7, we are going to be asking a lot more questions. Of course, Elon Musk and his role, looking at the line by line, the ledgers of the federal government, and the question, are U.S. taxpayers getting the bang for their buck they deserve? We'll be right back. Well, we've been talking a lot about the heroic work of crews battling wildfires in Southern California, but they are also protecting their neighborhoods in other ways. Look at this dramatic rescue. This is out of San Bernardino County Monday. Firefighters pulling a woman with special needs out of a home burning and then running to get her help. The fire, in fact, was so hot at one point it charred and melted some of the firefighters' protective gear. Just a picture of what goes on in every town USA when these firefighters and first responders risk their own lives. But they say they didn't think twice about putting their lives on the line. They knew somebody on the inside of that home needed help. They reached in and said, we will do it. That's our job. They do it day in and day out. We see and celebrate all of our nation's first responders. The news continues on CBS News 24/7.